$900 Central Africa time on this Thursday. Of course, it's the 12th of October. Kendall, a very good morning. I'm Elvis Presley.
Good morning to you all. I'm Kendall Makamat.
We'll be with you until 12 o'clock today. Now, the focus today is on the families of the Esidimeni victims that broke down in tears yesterday as the project leader of the Gauteng Health Department apologized for their loss for the mentally ill patients that were transferred to unlicensed NGOs. Kendall.
Oh, it's shocking, absolutely shocking. And also shocking as well is the revelations that have been coming out in just this first week. So we want to know from you, what do you make of these revelations thus far in the Esidimeni arbitration?
I'd like to find out from you. Let us know on the Twitter handle at SABC Newsroom as well as on the Facebook page. What you are telling us right now is the following. Bongani says, Mr. Masanochi, I hope his last words echoed well, and I hope they found a space in the hearts and minds of all the senior managers. Truth to power. Speak out.
Gutalo says it's better because they do admit their mistakes, though it can't heal or bring back the members of their families.
Well, those are some of your comments thus far. Please keep them coming. We'll probably go there live a little bit later in the program to the Esidimeni arbitration. But we also focus on South Africa that has become a fertile ground for many illicit and fake doctors preying on unsuspecting patients in this country.
Yes, and it's become a real problem, and we want to find out, is government doing enough to curb the increase of bogus doctors?
Well, there's your poll right there. So far, 188 votes in, 23 hours left to vote. 84% of you are saying that government is not doing enough to curb the increase of bogus doctors. We'll speak to the minister a little bit later in the program. 16% are saying yes, government is doing enough.
First up, we've got Mahlomola, who says government has stopped doing anything to whomever pays to do it. If I pay them to be a bogus cop, they would let me be one. It's a fair trade.
This one from Michael Big M. Satola says, no, government is failing on many levels, but I personally think tightening up security and our borders will be a great start, because that's where our problems start. So says Michael the Big M, because many of the doctors found thus far has been foreign nationals, and we're going to speak to the stakeholders around that issue as well a little bit later.
Yeah, and Mahlomola's comment was dripping with sarcasm, wasn't it?
Yes. Now, if you're going to the MT8 final this weekend?
Oh yes, we want to find out from you, after these floods, are you confident that Durban will be ready to host the MT8 final after the massive floods this weekend? And those people that have seen photos coming out of Kingsmead Stadium just next door to Moses Mabhida, it's like a swimming pool. So the question is, will Durban be ready for the MT8 final this weekend?
Michael Big M says, a big yes from me. I believe the worst is behind us, and Mabhida is a world-class facility. I hope the game will be a silver lining to all the people of KwaZulu-Natal and, of course, Durban.
Mystic Man says the storm is over now. Yesterday we were disgruntled. Now it's time to put it behind us and enjoy football as long as the field is green and not mud.
Well, there you have it. Wonderful comments coming through. So will Durban be ready? You've seen the water rushing in the streets, cars, property damage. Will they be ready? That's the big question. Please let us know. But right now, let's take a look at your news headlines. The Gauteng High Court is to deliver judgment on the inquest into the death of the anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Timol. ANC Secretary-General Gwede Mantashe seeks explanation on why the party's deputy president may not be the next leader. And the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government assesses damage caused by the devastating storms, which cost an estimated R500 million in the city. Those are your headlines, but before we get to the news, let's find out from Kendall Makamate whether or not people will be swimming in Durban when they do get there.
Yeah, let's hope it's not a mud bath when we get to the MT8 final over the weekend. Quite a lot to cover in the sports. Good morning to you all. This is what we have for you today. Springbok forwards coach Johan van Graan moves to Munster to shadow Rassie Erasmus as head coach as Erasmus prepares to come back to South Africa as director of rugby for SARU.
Obviously a lot about me, especially the technical team, in terms of how I want us to play.
The weekend's MT8 final promises fireworks as both coaches try to focus more on what's in front of them than what's in the past.
That's where I concentrate my focus on, not too much bothered about Eric or Super Sport.
World number 2 Roger Federer overcomes tough resistance from Argentina's Diego Schwartzman to win in the second round of the Shanghai Masters. I'll have this in more detail at 10:40. Do stay with us as Elvis has got the news.
Thank you, Kendall. Top story this hour. The Gauteng High Court will deliver judgment today on the inquest into the death of the anti-apartheid activist Ahmed Timol. Timol was arrested in Johannesburg in 1971 and died 5 days later. He allegedly jumped from the 10th floor at what was then the John Foster Square, since renamed the Johannesburg Central Police Station.
Did Timol jump or was he murdered? That's what the new probe into his death is trying to figure out. The Timol family had pursued the matter with the courts, and 45 years on, they'll finally get answers.
There's no way that he would take his own life. No way. He was mentally very stable. He had an extremely strong personality.
Former detainees captured with Timol testified, and so too did prominent human rights lawyer George Bezos. All disputed the apartheid police's version of events on that fateful day. They were backed up by a forensic pathologist.
They describe a depressed skull fracture, which means that the outer surface of the bone was pressed into the inner surface of the bone so that it impacted on the brain in that area. And why I want to illustrate this point quite carefully is that the base of skull fractures were not related to this depressed skull fracture. So there was no extension from the depressed skull fracture to the base of skull fractures or vice versa.
But the former security police officer, João Rodrigues, stuck to his story. He was the last person to see Timol alive.
I ran out of the office into the. Ek het uit die vertrek uit in die gang ingehardloop.
I ran out of the office through the passage.
En ek het geskree.
And I screamed.
Timol het gespring.
And Timol jumped.
The defense argued that the state's claim that Timol had committed suicide was a fabrication. The inquest into the death was reopened this year, and now the final curtain is about to be drawn. Janji Chauke, SABC News.
As soon as the hearings start, we'll go there live. Now, ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe says that he is waiting for an explanation on why the party's deputy president should not become its second or its next leader. He was delivering a lecture at a South African Communist Party function on the centenary celebrations of the former ANC president, Oliver Tambo. Mantashe says where a properly planned succession strategy has not happened in the past, it has led to a disaster. He says if the party wants a female president, it should elect her as a deputy to prepare her for the role of president. In a series of tweets, Mantashe says that the ANC, as a 105-year-old revolutionary movement, cannot sit on the sidelines and not manage its leadership succession process. He also warned that the SACP's intention to contest state power in the future could lead to the ANC and SACP losing power. The KwaZulu-Natal provincial government says it is still assessing the damage caused by Tuesday's devastating storm, with some insurance companies already estimating it at 500 million rand. The death toll from the storm stands now at 14. More than 40 schools have been forced to close and 8 hospitals were damaged. 6 theatres are affected at one of Durban's busiest hospitals, King Edward, where the damage has been estimated at 25 million rand. Elsewhere in the city, homes were destroyed and scores of people have been displaced. A massive cleanup operation is underway. Insurance companies say they have their hands full trying to process claims and have urged homeowners to have all the relevant documents ready in order to speed up the process. When Zambia declared Oliver Tambo's safe house in Lusaka a heritage site in February, it was a clear reminder of the role that Zambia played in the stalwart's life and the struggle for liberation. But there's more to Zambia's hospitality for the struggle, and incumbent President Jacob Zuma calls it the former headquarters of the African National Congress. Let's take a look.
When Tambo went into exile in 1961, he set up the ANC headquarters in Tanzania in a bid to get Umkhonto weSizwe to get military training in that country. Northern Rhodesia, present-day Zambia, became critical for the passage of refugees from Botswana. In 1969, Tambo moved the headquarters to Lusaka, which also became the home of Radio Freedom, which could be received in South Africa. In 1985, the ANC held its first national consultative conference in Lusaka. The Zambian army provided security, but Zambia too was not immune to apartheid pressure and atrocities. Just 2 weeks after former President Nelson Mandela's release and the unbanning of the ANC in 1990, he visited Zambia to meet the ANC NEC.
He is the man who can work from 6 o'clock in the morning, past 12 midnight, working continuously, forgetting that he should eat. And a man like that deserves a hero's welcome.
That same year, the ANC Women's League met in Lusaka to elect its interim leadership ahead of their return to South Africa. Post-1994, South Africa and Zambia established full diplomatic relations.
With his fellow exiles, he preached reconciliation, preached, don't forget, you can't forget your history, but forgive. He did that, I believe, is one of the most wonderful examples of correct leadership.
Since his passing, O.R. Tambo's birthday is celebrated every year. A visit to his grave in Benoni, the norm, and an opportunity to reflect on the values he stood for.
What would O.R. have done? And what O.R. would have done would have said, the reason we sit in those positions of leadership is to serve the people of South Africa. Nothing else. That none of us sit in positions of authority to serve ourselves, to enrich ourselves, to make sure that we appear on television every day, to become popular. We sit in positions of leadership in order to serve the people of South Africa. That's what O.R. Tambo would have said.
President Jacob Zuma's visit to Zambia will cement relations between the two countries. Sophie Mkwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Now, President Jacob Zuma is on a state visit to Zambia. And for the latest, we now go to our SABC presidential correspondent, Mzwandile Mbeche. Very good morning to you, Mzwandile. Can you tell us about the president's visit to Zambia and the program that he will embark on?
Thank you very much, Elvis. I'm sure you can see the ceremonial guard is already standing on guard because the president can land at any time now, indeed, to undertake the two-day state visit, as you have mentioned in your intro there. Obviously, Zambia is quite important to South Africa. You know that during the liberation struggles, the South Africans found home here. And indeed, this state visit is part of actually those attempts to make sure that they improve all those relations. And we know, Elvis, that now relations have moved on. It's no longer about the liberation struggle, but it's about what is it that they should do. Everyone knows that Zambia is free politically. Everyone knows that South Africa is free politically. Now the focus shifts to the economy. The people of the continent, the people of the region, and indeed of the two countries need to be freed economically. But to share a bit of light on this state visit, Elvis, I'm with the Minister of Energy, Minister Kenzani Kubai. Minister, yes, we agree that the relations are good, they're cordial, but for the ordinary person in the street, what do they mean?
They mean in terms of the relations for us in the economic sector is that trade relations are improving between the two countries. From the energy portfolio, we've been, as South Africa, providing electricity to Zambia. We are doing power trade. We continue to look at other avenues around the petroleum sector. So if we are to work very well and improve even where we are doing, we will help each other in creating jobs in our own countries, in South Africa and as well in Zambia, because relations about two countries, how can they benefit better from each other?
You spoke about the issue of electricity. At some point about 2 years ago, South Africa was battling this issue, load shedding every day. But here you are talking about South Africa selling electricity. That to me suggests we have excess electricity, and then the role that the continent or our neighboring countries are playing in terms of making sure that they're boosting our revenue. Does that happen?
No, definitely. That's why I'm talking about power trade, because with what we have built as transmission lines between ourselves and various countries in the region, we're currently finalizing even the transmission lines between ourselves and Mozambique and Zimbabwe, so that we can link with the whole region and the whole continent. That makes it easy for us to export electricity from South Africa, but if we are to have a problem, for example, like we did in 2018, when you have those transmission lines, you are able to buy from the other country that has access. So our mission in the portfolio of energy is to say not only South Africa must not be dark, but also the region and the continent. Lights must remain on.
So I wish I could ask you about the Inga situation, which has been spoken about for a very long time, but I'm not sure if there's anything coming of it.
No, the Grand Inga, definitely there's some work. We do acknowledge that it hasn't moved at the pace we wanted. And obviously, South Africans will understand the situation in DRC, which would have contributed, the instability which would have contributed to some delays. Zambia is part of that. We have incorporated them. They've wanted to be part. We are waiting for them to finalize the agreement, because there's an IGMOU, what we call IGMOU, Intergovernmental Memorandum of Understanding, that they need to sign as Zambians, looking at the conditions that we are saying their participation. Because what we are saying in South Africa is that while we acknowledge we are moving faster in terms of economic growth, we are saying we should not leave other African countries, especially within our region, especially those who stood with us at the most difficult times. When we uplift ourselves, when we become better, we should take them along with us, because that's part of what the liberation was about.
Thank you very much, Minister. You had the Minister saying, as we power the continent, and then everyone must then be able to benefit, because at the end of the day, whatever trade deals that are being made, whatever agreements that are being entered to and signed, they must benefit the ordinary men and women in the street. Elvis?
What provisions has been made, Swandile, to include the OR Tambo centenary celebrations there?
I'm not sure if I heard you very well, but I think you are speaking about the preparations for the OR Tambo celebrations and the National Heritage Site that will be unveiled tomorrow. Elvis, what is going to be happening is that after the state visit today, which the president is undertaking, and then tomorrow he will go to a house where OR Tambo used to live for about 22 years. And that house, because of its importance in terms of contributing to the democracy that we see in South Africa, has been turned into a national heritage site. So that house will be officially unveiled by President Jacob Zuma and the President Edgar Lungu, really signifying the importance and the bonds that exist between these two countries, Elvis.
Thank you so much for that report. That was SABC Mzwandile Mbeja live from Zambia. The President will be there in the country shortly. Let's now take a look at what's happening on social media and what is trending. And let's start off with that hashtag Durban storm. After heavy rains caused havoc in various parts of Durban, the death toll had risen to 14. The city are trying to recover after losing their homes and belongings and their cars and even their loved ones. Insurance companies already estimating damages amounting to 500 million rand. And of course, tomorrow and on Saturday, we'll have the big MTN 8 final there. I want to find out from you whether or not Durban will be ready to host it. Then, moving further afield, protests broke out in Kenya yesterday in reaction to the opposition party leader Raila Odinga, who was chosen to pull out of the rerun of the election. Odinga is heading to the UK to give a talk about the situation in the country. Hashtag Kenya. And in Malawi, the United Nations has pulled its staff out of the country after 5 people have been killed by vigilante vampire hunting mobs. The violence has mostly been carried out by mobs hunting for people believed to drink human blood as part of magic rituals. At 5 p.m, curfew has been imposed as rumors of witchcraft spread. That is hashtag Malawi Vampire. In the U.S., wildfires are causing devastation in California. That's according to local news there. The death toll has risen to 21 and around 560 people are missing in Sonoma County. So far, 3,500 structures have been destroyed. Hashtag California wildfires. And as we continue with our daily routine here on Earth, an asteroid will fly by 8 times closer than the moon. NASA has reported that we are not in danger. Look at that. Very, very close to Earth, isn't it? Let's now take a look at our picture of the day that comes from Keith Hendry and is showing photos of the fire in Camps Bay yesterday. It was not such a small fire as you can see there. Look at the fire up in the mountains there. Hashtag Camps Bay Fire. We'll keep you posted on that developing story. Our comment of the day comes from Ntabiseng Mukwena, who says, this Esidimeni story, the lack of accountability is shocking. Hashtag Esidimeni. Well, what do you make of that? Because that's a question we pose to you, of course. What do you make of the revelations thus far that came out of Esidimeni? Let's now take a look at what's happening in our courts, and we start in the northwest, where a 46-year-old man accused of shooting dead a teenager and wounding 2 others in Bladeville is expected to appear in the Lichtenburg Magistrates Court. He's accused of killing Spencer Tsukuru, and faced 2 counts of attempted murder for shooting and wounding a 20-year-old man and a 17-year-old boy on Tuesday morning. He allegedly fired 3 shots at the protesters. The suspect handed himself over to the police on Tuesday night. On to the Western Cape now. A 38-year-old is expected to appear in the Bellville Magistrates Court on charges of contravening the Customs Act. Custom officials arrested the man at the Cape Town International Airport yesterday afternoon after he was found in possession of 2 suitcases filled with, wait for this, 10 million rand in cash. Well, we'll keep you updated on these cases and more as they do develop. Let's now throw forward and look at what's happening in the morrow. Tomorrow on the show, we will be looking at the first week of the hearing into the life Esidimeni arbitration into the deaths of 118 patients. The hearings are under the chairmanship of retired Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Mosoneke. We'll go there live shortly as soon as the hearing continues, so you have to stay tuned. But our focus this morning is on bogus doctors. And that's why, of course, we're asking you that question in relation to bogus doctors and whether or not the country is doing enough to stop this increase of bogus doctors in the country. The Health Professional Council in South Africa says it is growing increasingly concerned about the growing number of bogus doctors operating in the country, and they are currently investigating nearly 500 cases involving suspicious practitioners. The HPCSA says that 38 bogus doctors have been arrested around the country since January, with 4 arrested in Gauteng over the past month.
Frustrated, confused and desperate, all these patients waiting in anticipation.
We got here, paid the money, we sat, and after an hour, police came and told us the doctor is fake.
He did not even have qualifications. He's just fake. He's eating our money.
A Dr. Mike has been treating patients and dispensing medication and writing out medical certificates illegally. The bogus doctor fled through the back door as authorities arrived. Employees also tried to escape with the money paid by the patients. On the premises, no signs of legal operating licenses or even qualifications.
As soon as our investigators walked into the searcher, the doctor used the back door to escape and run away. We're still looking for him. The conditions are horrible, completely unhygienic for this thing to be called a doctor's room.
After a long wait, these angry patients were finally refunded their monies. Authorities say an investigation into medical aid claims made by the doctor is underway. Last month, 4 fake doctors were arrested in Ekurhuleni, and last week another one was taken into custody in Soweto. Lapang Alamu, SABC News in Vereeniging.
And that is why we're asking you this question. Is government doing enough to curb the increase in fake doctors? Well, let's first take a look at what's happening on our poll. Is government doing enough there? Let's take a look. 218 votes in. 85% of people in South Africa and the African continent are suggesting that government is not doing enough to stop the increase of bogus doctors. 15% are saying, yes, government is doing enough. You are tweeting us. Let's take a look. Mutaheli says, I think government should shut those bogus doctors' pharmacies and make them and arrest them, he says. Kutalo says, no, we'll always have this havoc since corruption exists. This one from Mystic Man says, which government? Do we really have one? Corruption and fake qualification is in their midst. They acquire it from the same known college of the mafia. So says Mystic Man. Well, that's his thoughts. What are your thoughts? And remember, you can do so at any time during the course of the day. But we're also asking you the question. And look at your question on your screen right now as we continue. What do you make of the revelations so far in the Esidimeni arbitration process? Let's take a look at what you are telling us. This one says, from Skumbuzo, Department of Health have failed the vulnerable people who depends on government and the healthcare services. Vote Oscarini for Pushka says, Pule, Kwedani Mashlangu was in charge of this whole mess. She needs to be called to account. Atini says, in honor of those who lost their lives, they must not be forgotten. Atini, Moses, keep them coming. We'll read them as we continue. And of course, we want you to do so all the time. You can participate in the poll as well, because we're asking 2 things that really affect you and me as consumers, as patients in this country. We're looking at Esidimeni, and of course we're also looking at bogus doctors. As you can see, they are getting ready for the arbitration process to start as soon as. So let's we're going to find out, we're going to cross their live shortly as soon as they are ready. But let's now take a look at what's happening on our Facebook page. The KwaZulu-Natal government says it will take a while to finish the assessment of the damage that the devastating storms have caused, as some insurance companies put it at 500 million rand. Then, one of Liberia's leading political parties called for a halt in announcing the results of Tuesday's presidential election. citing irregularities in the vote. Well, that will be interesting to watch because it was a peaceful voting process. We'll find out what happens after that. And finally, Baroka FC goalkeeper Oscarine Musuluke has made the shortlist for the coveted FIFA Pushkas. Of course, that award to be announced in London later this month. Well, simply search for the SABC Newsroom on your Facebook page and you can follow us there. And remember, you have to vote for Oscarine to win. So you can go online to the FIFA website and vote there. Vote Oscarine. Brilliant goal, was it not? Kendall will probably show it to you a little bit later when he talks about Oscarine. But right now, let's go global and take a look at what's happening on the newspapers from around the globe. We start off in the Big Apple, New York City. The New York Times there reports that the North American Free Trade Agreement, long a punching bag for Donald Trump, is edging closer towards collapse as negotiators gather for more talks. Then moving to the United Kingdom, The Guardian says that higher income tax rates for the rich would help reduce inequality without having an adverse impact on growth. The International Monetary Fund says, well, time to tax the rich and help the poor, says the IMF. I remember we talked about that quite a while back, of course, that there should be increased taxes. And finally, in Australia, The Age reports that hackers got hold of sensitive, not classified information about Australia's warplanes and Navy vessels. And the Defence Industry Minister says it's a warning to all of us. Hackers steals defense data there. Well, we'll take a short break, and when we return, we'll give you more.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Multiple League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
We're talking news, business and sporting updates both continentally and abroad. South Africa is in its first economic recession since 2009.
Currency has appreciated quite a lot, especially for this year. And it has benefited from a number of things, not so much to do with what was happening here at home.
The Islamic State-linked news agency Amaq claims the latest attack was launched because of Australia's backing in the US fight against the group.
Constad is one of the dozens of women who have accused Cosby of sexual assault, but hers is the only case recent enough to be subjected to criminal prosecution.
Stay tuned to News Today at 3 p.m. from Monday to Friday on SABC News.
A top 5 rated horse racing event in the world, fashion is a highlight for those in attendance. All decked out in blue and white, the Lomorians Queen Plate is the premier event that kicked off everyone's social calendar.
That it was all part of my master plan to cast John Legend, but deprive him of his normal instrument and give that one to Ryan.
The House of Truth is not just a name. It is a religion. It is a lifestyle. It is a conviction that drives us.
What really excites me is how people have kept it very simple and also played with the theme, and how each person has interpreted it in their own way.
To stay updated with all the current entertainment news, tune into Trends every Saturday from 12 to 1.
The National Health Department Director General Precious Motsotso will continue to testify when the Life Esidimeni hearings resume in Parktown here in Johannesburg today. Yesterday, she said that Gauteng health officials failed to provide her with a detailed plan regarding the transfer of mentally ill patients from Life Esidimeni. Let's go there live.
The families before you, the nation and the rest of the world are waiting eagerly to find out what did the government do in response to the recommendations made by the Office of the Ombudsman. You were giving that detail yesterday, and if we may proceed in the same way so that everyone should be made aware what was required of the government and what has been the appropriate steps which were taken by the government in response to those recommendations. If we may proceed from the document that we handed up yesterday relating to the implementation of those recommendations, if you can turn to page 5 of the document. And we will then have to deal with recommendation number 11. To the extent that some of the parties might be familiar with these recommendations, but we need to emphasize and make sure that everyone gets to understand exactly what has been done in relation to which recommendation. Then if I can just read for the record, recommendation 11. In light of the findings in the report, the National Department of Health must review all 27 NGOs involved in the Gauteng Marathon project. Those that do not meet health care standards should be deregistered, closed down, and their licenses revoked in compliance with the law. Can you just give your account of what the department has done in order to make sure that this recommendation is complied with to deal with the unfortunate events which had occurred?
Justice, before we could resume with the review, we first had to consult various stakeholders, but we also had to go and visit all the facilities. But given the time frames, we could only visit 9 facilities. But we started with the one where most people died, which is Precious Angels. As we were visiting facilities, it was clear that even though Precious Angels was identified as one NGO, but they had 2 facilities, one in Atteridgeville, the other one in Denville. We visited even government hospitals where some of the mental health users were kept, so that we could understand. We also went to Cullinan because one of the family members expressed a concern and said she wanted her family, her relative, moved immediately from Cullinan. We consulted most of the people who are raising their voices against the closure of this contract, convened a meeting. The Ombud released the report on the 1st. We convened that meeting on the 3rd. We had our visits on the 2nd. The idea of having that meeting was to understand fully what steps would we have to take to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past? We also asked for names of experts that could assist us with assessing the patients that were held in the NGOs, because our view was that it was not just about reviewing and deregistering. Firstly, we had to assess the status and the risks so that for those who were at risk, they could be moved immediately, even as we're reviewing the appropriateness of the facilities. So all 27 NGOs that are cited in the Ombuds were assessed by this multidisciplinary committee that was appointed by the minister, which included psychologists, psychiatrists, occupational therapists, but we also approached family members so that we could also get their input. And they had established a family committee, and we wanted to hear from them. So out of the 27 facilities, prior to the Ombuds report, the ministerial task team had already recommended that there be closure of some of the facilities. So by the time the report was released, there were facilities that were already closed. So out of 20 facilities, there was a recommendation that 14 had to be closed and patients had to be relocated to more adequate private facilities. But our focus was not just on the facilities where we're going to move mental health users and patients, but it was also to assess facilities where they were going to be moved to. So we had a team that had to go and identify facilities where, appropriate facilities where they would be moved to. Letters had to be written to all assessed NGOs indicating deficiencies that had been identified and also alerting them that they will be considered for closure at an appropriate time when the move of mental health users began.
Thank you. Recommendation 12 required that the National Minister of Health must with immediate effect appoint a task team to review the licensing regulations and procedures to ensure they comply with the National Health Act, the Mental Health Care Act of 2002, and the norms and standards. The newly established process must ensure that the non-governmental organization certification is done, and this newly established licensing process should form the first line of protection for the mentally ill. Currently, this does not seem to be the case. Can you then elaborate on the steps taken by the government in response to this?
The provision for the licensing of facilities in terms of the Mental Health Act, it's a competence of provincial health departments. For us to review those regulations, it would require that we not only look at the regulations that are in terms of the Mental Health Act, because there are actually 4 processes that are involved. The first is that before an NGO can operate, the Department of Social Development must issue them with a registration. Secondly, before an NGO can operate, they must have a municipality license. Thirdly, before an NGO can operate to render mental health services, if they are also going to render health services, they must have a license to render health services in terms of the National Health Act, but they must also have a license in terms of the Mental Health Act. So there are actually 4 key requirements. So the team that we appointed had to review all of these requirements. And based on that, our advice was that for the initial phase, we had to come up with the guidelines for NGOs, and these guidelines were developed and gazetted for licensing of residential and daycare facilities for people with mental and or intellectual disabilities, allowing for comment for a 45-day period. But in addition, because the recommendation was specific about licensing regulations, we looked at the report that was released by the Law Reform Commission, which says that there's a plethora of laws in the health sector. There are actually about 29 laws that govern the health sector. And of all those 29 laws, some of them are obsolete. Others actually still refer to the former homelands. And some have not been repealed, and others actually need to be proclaimed. Now, to just come up with regulations in that plethora of laws and regulations, we put a team together to start a process, because we have a specific provision in the National Health Act that deals with certificate of need, which also involved licensing. So in this whole exercise that we're involved in with the Law Reform Commission, we requested that we look comprehensively at these laws. But in the meantime, we've got these guidelines that the NGOs should follow.
But would the guidelines bind the province?
At the moment, the provisions to issue licenses are in terms of the Act. So it means the Act must be amended under which the regulations lie, and it takes time to amend laws.
Sure. But the narrower question was that the guidelines may be helpful, but they actually, do they have legal binding force in respect of the province?
The guidelines do not have binding legal force, but what we've established, and I also sought a legal opinion that we got to look at, if we have concurrent functions and we have different legislative provisions. For instance, the Free State passed a law to allow them to license facilities. And it is those complex provisions that could be in the National Health Act, in the provincial laws, that needed to be reviewed. So it would still not help us to just come up with regulations, because if the provisions are in the Principal Act, it will still not be a solution. But we thought guidelines could actually help NGOs to help them see what the expectations were for them to be compliant.
Thank you. The next recommendation, number 13, required that all patients from Life Esidimeni currently placed in unlawful non-governmental organizations must be urgently removed and placed in appropriate health establishments within the province, where competencies to take care of their specialized needs are constantly available. This must be done within 45 days to reduce risk and save life. Simultaneously, a full assessment and costing must be undertaken. Please proceed to elaborate of the steps taken.
Because the preliminary assessment that we made, that was made by the experts that were appointed by the minister, indicated that there are about 1,250 mental health users that need to be relocated. So the first step we did was to identify task teams, which I would describe as work streams. The one was a clinical work stream, which would actually be involved in the actual physical and clinical assessment of mental health users. The second was the logistics task team. This work stream, not task team, work stream, this was mainly to look at what would it entail to move people from one facility to the other. What transport was needed, what resources were needed. The third was about data and information, because we had to make sure that we were having records, proper records, and each person had a patient file, because this is also what was missing in that original move. The other team was family team, a team that would help us identify family members, know exactly where they are, because one condition was that nobody would be moved without having consulted a family member. They needed to know that they were at this place and they were going to be relocated to another facility and that they had to consent. So we had all of those work streams. And we appointed a project team to oversee this. But one key thing was that because we had understood that the other project was not well executed, we had to identify a facility where people would be appointed and they would be assigned and work there on a full-time basis and not be assigned any other responsibilities. We contacted Professor Eric Buch and asked him if we could use the Emergency Operating Center. Now, the Emergency Operating Center of the National Institute of Communicable Diseases, it's actually used when we have emergencies in the country, like disease outbreaks. We said, can we use this facility for this purpose? And they allowed us. We also asked if Treasury could allow us at National, if we could be allowed, because we didn't have budgeted funds for this. This was a Gauteng provincial project. And I asked for permission if they could allow me to allocate about 6 million just for this move so that we could fund this project. And that was granted. So the project team looked, according to the records that we had, there were about 1,712 patients that were relocated from Life Esidimeni.
Do you want to repeat the number? 1,700
1,712.
The same number as on the document.
Yes, that were relocated for Life Esidimeni to the NGO facilities. So during that period of the so-called Gauteng Department of Health Marathon Project, between that period, a total of 820 patients were transferred. So the process that we followed was that we first sent a team of clinicians, meaning we had to identify psychiatrists, occupational therapists to be part of the team, social workers and so on, and they had to first go and assess the patients. But we also had the family committee that had to contact the family members. If the family members couldn't make it, they had to stand in, look at the facilities where the members were, but also go to a facilities where they were relocated. We actually went there ourselves to witness the move so that we were satisfied with how the move was. And we also got to experience how bad some of the facilities were.
DG Matsutsu, the numbers, let's just get that right. You talked about 1,450. patients who were relocated, you had to relocate. But you say that the number of people who were moved from under the Marathon Project were 1,712. By simple deduction, one can see that if you add those who have passed on, there would be a number of people unaccounted for. Would you help me understand that?
1,250 is the number of patients that were assessed in the NGO facilities. There were patients that were in the government psychiatric hospitals, meaning during this process, some were moved. There were also those who were in our hospitals that were treated for other conditions other than mental health. So, meaning the 1,250 is those that were assessed by our teams.
I see.
Yes.
So the number is not 1,450, it's 1,250. I think that's where the mistake crept in. Okay, thank you.
You may proceed.
So during this period, we asked Gauteng Department of Health to, one, identify facilities where we're going to move the patients. They had to be inspected. They had to be issued with valid licenses. And I had to also sign to ensure that these were the licenses that were valid and also that they complied with the provisions of the Mental Health Act. They also had to sign a contract. They also had to agree with the terms because historically the previous contract that they had, they did not have a system of monitoring the performance of like Esidimeni providers in the past. So those measures had to be in place. So those are the conditions under which the contract had to be signed. So between the period of 3rd March 2017 and 31st May 2017, a total of 820 patients were transferred to the following facilities: clinics, Healthcare Selby Park Hospital, and Life Esidimeni, Baneng, and Waverley care centers. Now, I need to explain that when our teams were going to these facilities, even though our task was to identify former Life Esidimeni mental health users, in those facilities that were risky, we identified other mental health users that were not from Life Esidimeni. And it was our obligation at the time to also move them, but with the consent of the families, meaning we moved 750 of the patients from former Life Esidimeni, but in addition, moved others that were 9, what I would describe as non-Life Esidimeni. And there were about 70 of them that we moved. We had some family members who expressed that they did not want their family members moved, but we also had some of the patients themselves who were not happy to be moved because for some of the family members, they expressed consent. They didn't want to sign consent because they were saying it has been traumatic to be moving their members and loved ones repeatedly. They wanted a much more stable environment. Out of this number, about 359 of the patients still remain in the Gauteng Department of Health acute psychiatry and chronic rehabilitation facilities. That is in Sterfontein, Westkoppies, Cullinan, Chronic Rehabilitation Center. So they will be transferred over time to the contracted facilities, Selby and Life Esidimeni, and this will only happen with the recommendation of the psychiatrist so that they are stabilized and they are in a position to move, but it will also be with the consent of family members. 31 former Life Esidimeni patients still remain in 11 of the NGOs, like I said earlier, 6 of which were not among the 27 mentioned, meaning as we were going along, we also got to know that there were other NGOs that were keeping mental health users. So we would send our inspectors to go and assess, check what the status was, and then if they were at risk, recommend that they were moved, meaning we went even beyond the list that the Ombud had given us.
But were the other patients also transferred by province at some earlier time?
Yes, that were not part of Life Esidimeni.
Yes.
Yes.
But they also were what is the word they use?
Relocated.
Placed or relocated by province.
It is some NGOs that the province had a relationship with, where they house people, but the conditions where they were housed were not suitable. And we decided then even those would move them to appropriate facilities.
You know, Mr. Musinochi, yesterday, as part of his response was that we've always used NGOs, and there are about 5,000 patients out there at NGOs, and the situation is perfect there. So not everything is questionable, so to speak. What were your findings?
Our findings were that if you look historically how the province was structured, some of the contracts were with Department of Social Development, for instance. And the Department of Social Development would obviously not consider the provisions that are in the Mental Health Act or the provisions that are in the National Health Act. They would probably look at their own requirements as social development. But if people are going to be rendered health services, that facility where health services are rendered has to be in accordance with requirements for licensing health facilities. If it is for mental health, it has to be in accordance with requirements for mental health facilities. So when we send out the teams and we got to know that there were facilities that were unsuitable, we would send them to establish. But we also recommended to the Gauteng Provincial Department that both departments, social development and health, had to meet as a matter of urgency, look at the list of all the NGOs and start inspecting all of them to establish whether they were suitable or not. And I have been informed, I think when the acting head of department, Dr. Kinoshi, come, he will explain how many they've been able to visit, how many of those involve people. So we just made that recommendation for Gauteng to act on it.
But one cannot supinely say all is fine with the rest of the NGOs, other than those that received patients from Life Esidimeni. I say one can make a general statement that the balance of the NGOs that housed patients that needed mental health care were all fine and were functioning properly.
Yes,
Can one make that generalization?
Yes, Justice, I think what the statement that we can make is that there are NGOs that render reasonable services. There are NGOs that are not suitable. But I also think we need to be cautious so that the message is not NGOs are bad, because there are NGOs that do good work. There are NGOs that are not good, that should not be rendering these services. So it is for that reason that we recommended that Gauteng Health Department and Social Development meet and look at the list of all the NGOs that have been licensed or registered with them and make sure that they were suitable.
Okay.
You may proceed.
"31 former life Esidimeni still remain in those NGOs, like I said, and that some family members refused that they be relocated. They didn't want to sign consent forms. 335 of the life Esidimeni patients were discharged directly to their homes. And there are also still 59 patients who were discharged but have not been traced. So what we were doing, we also wanted to know, like I said, we wanted to account for each one. And I would like to put on record that 59, we can still not say where they are and who they are. However, we can confirm that they are drawing their SASSA grants. So it is to locate their addresses and where they are. Because we went to Home Affairs and said, we want to know if they are still alive.
That needs a little explanation. What do you mean they were discharged home but have not yet been traced?
Meaning, remember, we had 1,712. Of the 1,712, everyone we're looking for on the list, we could account for. But the 59, we can't. They were not in our facilities. They were not in our hospitals. They were not in the psychiatric hospitals. They were not in the NGOs. So we had to find a way of identifying them and ensure also that they were not duplicates, like I indicated yesterday. And in trying to find them, we could only say that they're probably out there, but we still have to find them, either find the address or a mechanism of identification.
But part of what were they? The 59 were part of which
they were part of
category of patients?
They were part of 1,712.
Okay.
You may proceed.
So I would like to indicate that Dr. Kinosi will also explain that when the Ombud reported the number of deaths, it was up until he released these reports. But because we still asked the Gauteng Department of Health to continue monitoring the patients, they will also say up to when we're moving or up until end of September, what were the number of deaths and so on. I think that they will report, and Dr. Kinosi will report that.
Okay.
Let's then move to recommendation number 14, which...
Well, before you do, the number, the last, from October 15 till the end of the Health Ombud agreed reporting on 1st February 2718. So that number you also agree with, subject to further work that was done afterwards?
Yes, that number is the Ombud's number that he announced.
Okay.
But like I said, Justice, we also send our team to also identify, it's the number that maybe at the time the Ombud had as at the first. But our activities were post the report of the Ombud, because we went to mortuaries, we went to facilities, we went to our hospitals, and as we're going to those facilities, we're identifying people who had to be linked to their family members, and we also had to reconcile.
Yes, I was trying to find out from the work National Department and Province did afterwards, would the number be the same as the ombuds number?
No, it will be slightly more than that. It will not be 118.
It will be slightly more than the ombuds number?
Yes.
Do you want to venture to hazard a guess now, or you want to leave it to Dr. Kinosi?
Dr. Kinosi will explain
We'll
because
deal
he
with
has,
that.
yes, he has
Okay.
exactly the same number.
Okay.
The exact number.
On current work done, you think probably people related to the critical period are probably more than the 118 that the Ombudsman has reported on?
Yes, they are slightly more than that.
Okay. And are there, if Dr. Kinosi is going to deal with it, that is fine. We could wait till then. Are there unaccounted deceased mental health care users
yes,
who fall within the control period?
The number that
in other words, are there corpses out there that have not yet been fully and properly identified?
The number I have is 7. There are 7 that I'm aware of that have not been accounted for.
Mm. And that probably would have passed on.
They have passed on. The family members must still be traced.
Then we're talking about corpses now. In other words, there still are corpses that are yet to be identified.
To be identified and family members traced.
Traced, yes. Thank you. You may proceed, DG.
Recommendation 14 required that there is an urgent need to review the National Health Act of 2003 and the Mental Care Health Act of 2002 to harmonize and bring alignment to different spheres of government. Centralization of certain functions and powers of the Mental Health Care Act must revert back to the National Health Minister, while Schedule 4, Part A of the Constitution and Section 3, Subsection 2, Section 21, Subsection 1, Section 25, Subsections 1 and 2, Sections 48 and 49, and Section 90 of the National Health Care Act, number 61 of 2003, recognize and define health as a concurrent competence between national and provincial government spheres. The findings and the lessons of this investigation merit such a review. Furthermore, projects of high impact on the quality and reputation of the national health system and whose outcomes undermine human dignity, human well-being, and human life must not be permitted nor be undertaken without express permission of the National Health Minister or his or her nominee. Are you able to deal with that?
I will deal with this briefly, Justice, in that we sought a legal opinion about concurrent functions and instances where the National Department of Health need to intervene when there is failure in providing services or compliance with norms and standards, or when people's lives are at risk, particularly with regard to the competence that reside with the provinces. The opinion we got is that, firstly, if this was to be done, and with regard to these areas, even though the opinion predates this event, it states that we'd have to have major changes in the National Health Act, because the National Health Act provides for the functions of the province, of National Department of Health, and also of municipalities. it also states that would then have to also amend certain sections of the Constitution, and it may not be desirable. This is the opinion we got. But it is also an opinion that says there is a provision already that is provided for Section 100 of the Constitution that we could rely on. But may I just say that even with Section 100, we notice that in Limpopo, it's not a straightforward thing. When there are interventions, when you rely on Section 100, when you do not get the cooperation of the provincial teams or the executive in the province and at national level do not work in partnership, it is very difficult to execute the provisions of Section 100, 1A and B. So our recommendation is that would have to look at this process of legislative review that is underway with the assistance of the Law Reform Commission.
Yes. You can do very little about that. Another day, another time, you must engage me and I can help you.
Thank you very much, Justice, for your...
Essentially, it's the whole conundrum of the schedules and the arrangements between concurrent and national competences and how you resolve the tension between the two. The Constitution tries to do that, and I've had something to do with that during the writing. But in the end, the resolution is a difficult one. You have to look at 4 or 5 things, whether in fact the law was intended to stipulate national norms and standards, and whether therefore it's appropriate to trump provincial competence in favor of national competence. So it's a very complex part of the Constitution. You don't want to, and none of us would want to go there. You might need, as you say, a constitutional amendment or a law that purports to set up national norms and standards in a way that would then subject provincial legislation to national competences. Anyway, I think we should go on to the next one, because I don't think there's much you can do about it.
Thank you, Director General Matsuso. Let's proceed to recommendation 15, which stated that projects such as the Gauteng Mental Marathon Project must not in future be undertaken without a clear policy framework, without guidelines, and without oversight mechanisms and permission from the National Health Minister. Where such policy framework exists, the National Health Minister must ensure proper oversight and compliance.
Yes, this is being complied with, and legislation and a clear policy framework for community-based services are available. We do have laws, we do have policies, we do have norms and standards. But we've also gone further. We assembled a team to go to every single province to assess the services that they render, mental health services. The difficulty is if that does not happen. We have provincial executive authority, we have the national minister, but we also have National Health Council, which is established in terms of the National Health Act. It's a policy-making body, but it also has an oversight role and an advisory role. It's a council of the Minister of Health and the MECs of Health. In general terms, it's called MINMEC. So it is a forum that is available also for that purpose.
Where does the competence sit to build facilities where mental health care is provided? Where does that capital budget sit?
There are 2 streams of funding, Justice. The primary funding is through appropriations to provincial executive. And this is in a form of equitable share. The other stream is through conditional grants. But the conditional grants are project specific. So it's actually two streams. So when it comes
Conditional
to
grant from the Treasury, from where?
Treasury through National Department of Health. But it comes with conditions that must be strictly complied with.
You see, I don't think the previous witness was the appropriate person to know and answer that question. When I look at the facilities, these facilities were built before 1994. Am I right?
Yes, Justice.
Cullinan or Sterks, Fontaine or Vescopis. I mean, the names tell you, they were built before 1994. Have we built any after 1994? For mental health care in particular?
The one attempt.
By we, I mean you and me, those who have been in government.
Yes, I can just answer in a brief way to say that an attempt to build one, and if I were to say we, was an absolute disaster. And this is a facility that was built in Northern Cape that consumed huge resources and was not appropriate for mental health care. So it was a lesson for us that it should not have been done in that way. And with this provision in the Mental Health Act that we should not move towards keeping people in institutions, rather move towards community-based mental health care. We should rather make investments in our primary healthcare facilities, in our existing health facilities where outpatient services are appropriate. So the investment cannot be in building more facilities where people are going to be institutionalized. So that balance, and this is why the Northern Cape mental health facility that was being built was a key concern for us and has been a subject of an investigation.
But we are still using clinics, we are using live Esidimeni, we are using, I've seen it here in your report back. And once there were difficulties with community health care, the institutionalization route, the department ran right back to those institutions. So the question that begs an answer is, don't we need a mix of institutions and public health care facilities?
Precisely, we do. A balance between facilities that we call facilities for acute care, for mental health, and those that are for long-term care. And this is the difference between your Vescopis, your Sterkfontein, versus these other facilities that are for long-term care.
So the question still remains, do we need facilities for acute and long-term care? Do we need more of them?
We need more.
So that we don't have the temptation to move them out of clinics, move them out of live Esidimeni, move them.
Yes, we do need more of the long-term care that are community-based, but that integrate mental health users back into closer to families and closer to facilities. Because I think the concern here is that you don't want them to just be kept away, locked away. They need to integrate back into communities.
Sure.
But it has to be done properly.
And in the meantime, since the days of Sterkfontein and Westkoppies and Cullinan, our population has almost tripled. Doesn't it follow that facilities for long-term and chronic care will have to increase, even if you have the balance between public health care and institution-based care?
Yes, we do, but our approach is a slightly different one because we work on the basis of a normative framework. And the normative framework is that you, even in normal facilities, you must have psychiatric beds so that you don't go back and keep people in acute care and keep them away, locked away from communities. So we have designed and come up with norms about the number of beds in each hospital. There must be an allocated area for those who must be seen and treated for psychiatric care. So we have that breakdown per province, meaning these current healthcare facilities need to be renovated, refurbished, and expanded to provide for that.
Thank you.
Let's move to recommendation number 16, which records that the investigation has clearly shown that for deinstitutionalization to be undertaken properly, the primary and specialist multidisciplinary teams that are community-based mental health care services must be focused upon, must be resourced, and must be developed before the process is started. It will most probably require more financial and human resource investment initially for deinstitutionalization to take root. Sufficient budget should be allocated for the implementation.
Yes, the first step we took was to establish a task team that involves experts in the field. But of note is that there are two streams of work that we initiated. One was that as part of the finalization of the National Health Insurance, the minister identified 5 groups that he considered to be vulnerable groups that needed to be given urgent attention. And amongst those, the mental health care users were one particular group, meaning when the National Health Insurance Fund is created, the very first group that must benefit is mental health users. The second group is people with disabilities. The third group is women, children. And the other group is older persons. And the more recent group is people with cancer, because cancer has become a big problem in the country. The second, we said, while that is happening, we needed what I would describe as a special purpose vehicle, as a special funding just for this purpose. And we submitted that to Treasury to say, can we have a special purpose vehicle so that we can cater for this category and ensure that we do not have a problem. But the idea was that that funding would be kept as a conditional grant at national level, so that if there's a problem in a province, we must be able to intervene appropriately and timely. So we're still in discussion with Treasury because our initial request did not get much support because, as you know, we're in a very difficult fiscal environment, but we're also engaging Treasury on an ongoing basis. The next one is that there's been engagements of experts, strategic meetings, and also we've written the World Health Organization. They've offered to assist. They've even identified experts in the field. Because the institutionalization, as it's so termed, I don't use that word much. I prefer to say community-based mental health care so that it clearly shows what this is about. So we do have countries that tried this. It's a very difficult process that we need to get familiar with. We have to do it properly as a country. So we've had WHO respond to say they will assist because they are familiar with which countries have tried it, where it has worked, where it has not worked, so that we do it properly.
Professor Makhoba was very cautious about the institutionalization or home-based care, saying that probably only 2 countries in the world have managed to do this successfully, and that it is filled with snares and challenges, as we saw in the Marathon Project. Take people home to homes which are not suited for the task. It could be disastrous. What do you say to that? It's a policy framework, I understand. The desire to be linked and connected to families, I understand. But in fact, the world has not been, aren't we doing something where the world has not succeeded much?
I fully agree, and I would like to say up front, I'm not an expert in the field. Professor Freeman is the expert, and I think
Professor who?
Professor Freeman.
Yeah.
Is the expert.
Where do we find Professor Freeman?
He's the chief director in my department.
Chief director in your department?
Yes.
Will he be available to talk to us if we were to ask him?
Yes, he would be available.
He will be?
Yes.
Okay. I'll ask some of the support staff in my office to follow it up with you and see whether we could hear him out on this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. But you were responding and say you're not the expert. He is the expert. Will you
Yes.
please continue, DG?
Thank
you. Thank you, Director General. The next recommendation is recommendation 17, which actually made us to be here, which requires that the National Minister of Health must lead and facilitate a process jointly with the Premier of the province to contact all affected individuals and families and enter into an alternative dispute resolution process. This recommendation is based on the low trust, anger, frustration, loss of confidence in the current leadership of the Gauteng Department of Health by many stakeholders. The National Department of Health must respond humanely and in the best interest of affected individuals, families and relatives, and the nation. The process must incorporate and respect the diverse cultures and traditions of those concerned. The response must include an unconditional apology to families and relatives of deceased and life patients who were subjected to this avoidable trauma, and as a result of the emotional and psychological trauma the relatives have endured. Psychological counseling and support must be provided immediately. The outcome of such process should determine the way forward, such as mechanism of redress and compensation. A credible, prominent South African with established track record should lead such a process.
Yes. Justice, this is where we are today. This ADR process is about recommendation 17. And I would like to say that through this process, we've worked closely with the family committee. We've come to understand what this means. And that at this point, personally, I will unreservedly apologize for the failures but that something like this should never happen again.
Director General, I'm going to refer you back to file number 4, which is before you.
I think I'd like to say thank you for the apology, Director General. It's you know my views by now. I've mentioned them in the last 4 days. We do need a responsive government. And we need a caring government. And we need one that takes seriously Batupili notions. And these responses have been heartening. I wouldn't be here if I thought government, national and provincial, were not serious about making amends. And there's been a journey we've traveled together, and I think it's appropriate just to say it to the nation that you, as a province and as national government, you've been committed and serious to make amends, because wrongs ought to be corrected. First acknowledged, and there has to be apology, particularly to vulnerable people. And those who hold power should be able to respond to the needs of those who don't hold power and who depend on those who hold power. So the apology is welcome, and I'm aware of the cooperation you've had with families and the family committee, and I was part of that process that brought us to here. I just want to add my own appreciation for how province and state have behaved in trying to resolve this matter. That's, of course, just part of the story. We still have to go to equitable redress.
Thank you, Director General. Let's proceed to the last recommendation, 18 of the report, insofar as it relates to the national government. Although it relates to the Gauteng Review Board, if you may give your responses, where it reports that the Gauteng Mental Health Review Board was found to be moribund, ineffective, and without authority, and without independence. As a structure, its terms of reference must be clearly defined and strengthened in line with the National Health Act and the Mental Health Act and the Mental Health Care Act of 2002 and its independence authority re-established. Are you able to make any comments in relation to this recommendation 18?
Yes, I will just report based on what is in the document, but Dr. Kinoshi will provide details. The previous chair, as was recommended by the Ombud, was placed on suspension on the 22nd of February, and the inquiry commenced on the 22nd of March, and the final report, I think, will be provided, and Dr. Kinosi will indicate where we are with that. And a new mental health review board is being established by the province.
But how does this happen, DG, though? A board of 25 people, the Ombudsman tells us they just go dead. That's what the word moribund means. They become lifeless and don't, were they paid?
In fact, in our investigation, when we looked at documentation, firstly, how they were appointed was inappropriate. The records show that Ms. Manamela also signed a contract for them to work. I mean, there were some irregularities on how that whole system of the Mental Health Review Board operated in the province. And I think these are the things that the MEC is correcting, in that she had to replace the previous board and advertise so that there are nominations for the new board. But even that appointment, they had to be regionally based. I think there needs to be 5 per region so that they can operate optimally. So it's quite clear that this was not it was a dysfunction.
But is their function mainly supervisory?
Justice is far more than that. It's not supervisory. They have to intervene. The Mental Health Act provisions are clear. They have to intervene. So it's quite clear that even in this instance, the first group that should have intervened is the Mental Health Review Board.
So it has failed quite dismally in its duties, its statutory duties.
Indeed.
Thank you, Director General. Thanks for the time that you have given to highlight the positive steps that the government has taken in response to this unfortunate tragedy. And we thank you for alerting everyone to know what steps were taken in order to ensure that this type of history does not repeat itself. Mr. Justice, there are no further questions to the witness.
Thank you, Counsel. What's going to happen now, DG, is that there are going to be questions posed on the evidence in chief that you have given. We're going to start with Counsel from Section 27. And I think she is ready to go. Advocate Hassan.
Thanks, Justice Moseneke. I am ready. Good morning, DG. Thank you for making yourself available to this process. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of the families and the stakeholders for your apology. You've seen a lot through this process, I'm aware. And I know it's not been easy for you personally in the cleanup of what's happened. So thank you. And in fact, where I would like to begin is on the issue of cleanup and the topic that you debated with Justice Moseneke. And it's in relation to the powers of the National Department. While I understand the complexity and the issue of the constitutional allocation of competences between the different spheres of government, I don't understand us to be a country with a federal system of government. So maybe to try to avoid the complexity of this concurrent competence, what I'd rather do is use as a launch pad for these questions the constitutional requirement of cooperative government, which is in Section 41 of the Constitution. And I'm sure you don't know the Constitution off by heart, so I'm just going to refresh your memory on Section 41 of the Constitution and what I regard as relevant to these proceedings. Section 41 says, all spheres of government and all organs of state within each sphere must, and then in subparagraph H, it says, must cooperate with one another in mutual trust and good faith by 1, fostering friendly relations, 2, assisting and supporting one another, 3, informing one another of and consulting one another on matters of common interest, 4, coordinating their actions and legislation with one another. It's also essential that this cooperation takes place in order for us to have a coherent government. So using that then as the background, you say...
Of course, the Esidimeni arbitration is continuing, but now judgment is being handed down in the Ahmed Timol inquest in the North Gauteng High Court as we speak. It was reopened after the family found new evidence that proved that Ahmed Timol did not commit suicide, but instead died in police custody. Let's go there live.
2 assistant curators at the state mortuary, as well as 4 medical officials, being Dr. V.D. Kemp, the district surgeon Johannesburg, Dr. N.J. Skeppers, senior state pathologist, Dr. H. Koch, the pathologist who testified on behalf of the police, and Dr. J. Gladman, the pathologist for the Timol family. In the absence of that portion of the record of proceedings dealing with the evidence by the police, the 2017 reopened inquest was deprived of the benefit of the record of police officers' evidence. Such evidence would include the evidence in chief, cross-examination, and re-examination. Consequently, the 2017 reopened inquest was constrained to deal with the version as deposed to in the sworn statements by the police officials and summarized by the magistrate in his judgment. The surviving record of 1972 inquest has the evidence of the medical doctors and the post-mortem report. The magistrate, in a 77-page judgment, summarized the evidence of each of the police who testified in some detail, which summary proved to be helpful to the 2017 reopened inquest. The judgment also dealt with the medical evidence as well as that of the police involved in the investigation of Timol's death. The magistrate dismissed out of hand the evidence by Timol's mother in regard to the verbal altercation she had with the police at her home. In essence, the magistrate reached conclusions that came under attack in the 2017 reopened inquest. Firstly, he dismissed the submission that murder was involved as absurd because Timol was a valuable find to the security branch, who desperately wanted to keep him. Secondly, he also dismissed the theory that Timol fell by accident as being absurd. He concluded that Timol must have jumped out of the window on his own accord. Thirdly, the magistrate decided on the basis of the medical evidence that some of the injuries found on Timol's body are not consistent with the fall. The abrasions could have been between 4 and 8 days old, and the bruises between 1 and 7 days old. He further concluded that Timol was in custody for 4 days and 7 hours prior to his death. Fourthly, opined in relation to these ante-mortem injuries, that the nearest one could come to an explanation is that the injuries were sustained in a brawl where Timol was pushed around and possibly fell. Fifthly, even though Timol was interrogated for long hours, the magistrate found that he was treated in a civilized and humane way. There was therefore no basis to find any form of torture or mistreatment. 6, the magistrate also accepted that the evidence before him indicated beyond reasonable doubt that the deceased committed suicide. 7, he accepted that Timol was a communist and a prominent member of the Communist Party in South Africa. Timol was therefore conversant with all orders of the South African Communist Party members, including one which says, I quote, rather commit suicide than betray the organization, close quote. At the end of 1972 inquest, the magistrate made the following findings in terms of Section 16 of the Act. A, the identity of the deceased is Ahmed Timol, an Asian male, 29 years old, born South African, teacher by profession. Date of death, 27 October 1971. Cause or probable cause of death, the deceased died because of serious brain damage and loss of blood sustained when he jumped out of a window of room 1026 at John Foster Square and fell to the ground on the southern side of the building. He committed suicide. D, no living person is responsible for his death. In arriving at a finding, this court has to consider the entire evidence available on record and form a prima facie view. The nub of this case is what really caused Timol to fall to his death. This is really the question. It is not about the cause of death, which in essence has been medically diagnosed as arising out of severe head and chest injuries consequent to the fall. This is the context within which the conspectors of the evidence should be understood. In an attempt to respond to the question that lies at the heart of this case, the security branch fabricated a version that alleges that Timol on his own jumped out of a window of room 1026 at John Foster Square to commit suicide. In order to support this narrative, the security branch proffered 3 reasons. Firstly, that Timol during interrogation repeatedly expressed fear of being imprisoned for 20 to 25 years. Secondly, that he was scared that the 3 persons announced by Mr. X, those are the Jacobson brothers, have been arrested, will implicate him in criminal activity. Thirdly, that as a communist, he chose to commit suicide rather than betray his comrades. The magistrate was mindful of the inadequacy of these reasons and added the 4th, that sought to explain the injuries which Timol sustained before the fall. His unsubstantiated reason, which was the 4th reason here, was that Timol sustained injuries in a brawl where he was pushed around prior to his arrest. The bulk of the evidence presented in 2017 reopened inquest mainly challenges the 4 reasons on which this version of suicide rests. The evidence of the former detainees, the medical doctors, and the trajectory presents a version not considered in the 1972 inquest. In order to prove that Timol, like other detainees, was tortured to the extent that he could not have physically been in a condition to run towards the window, get out, and propel himself to land on the spot identified by the security branch within the time alleged by Rodriguez. This evidence not only challenges the probability of the security branch version, but provides a counter to the magistrate's reason for the ante-mortem injuries. The ante-mortem injuries are the injuries sustained before the fall. The evidence by members of the South African Communist Party is intended to demonstrate that Timol would not have committed suicide as suggested in the forged publication, and that he was trained to embrace a possible conviction and long-term prison sentence as a badge of honor. This evidence responds to the reasons advanced by the security branch that Timol was afraid to be imprisoned for 20 or more years, and further that his suicide was inspired by directives in the Communist Party publication. The evidence by former members of the police, that is Dutton and Erasmus, as well as the 3 civilians who witnessed Timol's body during and immediately after the fall in the mid-morning, not only challenges the probabilities of the version that Timol jumped at about 1500 hours 50, but also supports the contention that Rodriguez's version, which is premised on events occurring late in the afternoon, was fabricated and state-menaced as part of a cover-up to conceal the facts around the death of Timol. In regard to the reasons advanced that Timol was afraid to be implicated by Quinton, Henry, and Martin, no evidence was presented from either Mr. X or the 3 people mentioned. In fact, Quinton was charged and tried. At his trial, no mention was made of Timol, either by the state witnesses or any other person. Quinton was acquitted of the charges. The state had ample opportunity during that trial, even without Timol present to defend himself, to present evidence of a link between Quinton and him. That never happened. The Timol family, with reference to the evidence of Aesop as to how he introduced Timol to the 3 brothers, as well as the absence of any reference to Timol in the Quinton's trial, sought to demonstrate that the Jacobson's story was fabricated to support the allegation of suicide. Then there's the evidence of Nell on the mysterious disappearance of portions of the record containing the entire oral evidence of the police during the 1972 inquest proceedings. Significantly, only page 3 of Rodriguez's affidavit dealing with the version as to how Timol is supposed to have jumped is missing. The impression one gets is that there was a deliberate attempt to destroy the evidence in order to frustrate any attempt to reassess the evidence in case the inquest is reopened. The evidence presented in the 2017 reopened inquest is thus in direct response and challenge to the conclusions and findings of the magistrate in the 1972 inquest. The task of this court is therefore to evaluate all the evidence of the 2 inquest proceedings in light of the surviving record of the 1972 inquest and further evidence received in the 2017 reopened inquest. The evaluation of the evidence can thus no longer center solely on the version of the security branch. The evidence of the 2017 reopened inquest unmasked the cover-up, but due to the absence of the interrogators who have all passed on, the real events leading to the push could not be established. However, the evidence prima facie and logically points out that at the time Timol was pushed either out of the window of room 1026 or at the rooftop, he was in the company of members of the security branch in charge of his interrogation who were on duty. He could obviously not have been in a cell. These members were at least Gloy and Van Niekerk, as their police file records show and the evidence of Bauer and Lowe confirms. They were on duty at that time. The court is unable to establish on the evidence whether there was anyone else with them. It is the court's prima facie view that the push occurred during interrogation under circumstances where the security branch involved resorted to torture. The torture on Timol was applied with a view to extract information. Counsel for the family of Timol submits that the security branch are guilty of murder. Now, murder is committed intentionally, that is with direct intent, or through dolus eventualis. There's no evidence supporting the view that the security branch had direct intent to commit murder. There are theories suggesting that possibly, but no evidence to back that up. However, the evidence supports murder through dolus eventualis. In the matter of the Director of Public Prosecutions, Gauteng versus Pistorius, the Supreme Court of Appeal stated the principle as follows. I quote, dolus eventualis is present in instances where the perpetrator foresees the risk of death occurring, but nevertheless continues to act, appreciating that death might well occur, therefore gambling, as it were, with the life of the person against whom the act is directed, close quote. There are 4 reasons distilled from the evidence why the court is of the view that members of the security branch interrogating Timol had the requisite intent in the form of dolus eventualis to commit murder. Firstly, the methods of torture they applied on Timol's co-detainees were so brutal that there was an element of recklessness with the manner in which they occurred. Secondly, the injuries on Timol sustained ante-mortem, 35 in all, with various degrees of severity, demonstrate that there were no boundaries of respect for human life. Thirdly, the police, on their own version, removed the injured Timol from where he landed immediately after the fall, without summoning medical evidence, clearly in order to conceal the crime. The very act of his removal from the scene, as he was still alive then, may have accelerated his demise due to the police's reckless conduct at the scene. Fourthly, there was a history of detainees having died in detention, which seemed not to have had any deterrence on the conduct of the security police. Van Nieker, one of Timol's interrogators, on the day he died, already had a record of brutality at that time, which included convictions of 2 counts of assault, in which 1 victim died, and multiple complaints of serious assault and torture, in which he and Gloy, who was with him on the day Timol died, were accused of. These referred to the assault of detainees with iron rods and electric shocks, some which occurred months before the interrogation of Timol. One such incident was in February 1971. It is thus probable, on the evidence, that the security branch foresaw that their methods of interrogation carries the risk of death occurring, but nevertheless persisted unrestrained with the torture, appreciating that death might well occur. Having regard to the totality of the evidence of the 1972 inquest and the 2017 reopened inquest, this court concludes thus. 1, after his arrest on the night of 22 October 1971 and throughout the weekend, continuing to Monday 25th, Tuesday 26th, and Wednesday 27th, Timol was interrogated by members of the security branch, acting in teams and taking turns. This interrogation took place in room 1026, and Timol, contrary to his detention warrant, was kept in that room and not once taken to a holding cell. 2, as with all other detainees who were he was arrested with, and after him, during the same weekend and in John Foster Square, Timol was tortured by the interrogating members of the security branch in order to extract information out of him. 3, the torture included physical assault, which resulted in severe injuries. The injuries referred to were sustained before the fall and are distinct from those he sustained on his fall. 4, On 27 October 1971, Timol's interrogation was conducted by Gloy and Van Nieker. At the time Timol fell, he was under the care of at least Gloy and Van Nieker. 5. The personal file of Van Nieker indicates how he had been implicated and facing charges together with Gloy in the assault and murder of detainees. Some of these occurred prior to the death of Timol, while others continued even after the death of Timol. Thus, on the day Timol died, it was during their turn to interrogate him, and the records reflect that both were therefore in room 1026. 6. Consequently, the allegation by the security branch members that Timol was not assaulted is not true. Further, the conclusion by the magistrate that Timol was treated in a civilized and humane manner is also not correct. The trajectory evidence by Moodley excludes the possibility of Timol having either dived or jumped out of the window of room 1026 on the day he fell. Instead, the trajectory calculations support the view that the cause of the fall was that Timol was pushed either from the window of room 1026 or from the roof of John Foster Square building. 8. 3 independent witnesses put the time of Timol's fall as mid-morning on 27 October 1971. This is in direct contrast to Rodriguez's evidence that Timol fell between 1500 hours and 45, as well as 1600 hours. This court accepts that Timol fell in the mid-morning and that Rodriguez, if ever he was in room 1026 later in the afternoon, was brought there to legitimize a cover-up narrative. The substandard and sloppy manner in which the investigation of Timol's death was conducted by Bayes and his team supports the view that there was a clear intent to cover up the incident through a fabricated version of suicide. 10. Timol's fall to the ground was as a result of being pushed either from the window of room 1026 or from top of the roof of John Foster Square building. 11. Consequently, Timol did not meet his death because he committed suicide. Timol died as a result of having been pushed to fall, an act which was committed by members of the security branch with dolus eventualis as the form of intent and prima facie amounting to murder. 12, there's a prima facie evidence implicating Gloy and Van Nieker as police officers who were interrogating Timol when he was pushed to fall to his death. Rodriguez, on his own version, participated in the cover-up to conceal the crime of murder as an accessory to the effect of murder. And he went on to commit perjury by presenting contradictory evidence before the 1972 as well as the 2017 inquest. A recommendation is to be made to have him investigated and prosecuted for these offenses. Ordinarily, in an inquest, the court makes its finding in terms of Section 16.2 of the Act. This finding is made narrowly in answer to 4 questions. These questions are about A, the identity of the deceased, B, the cause or likely cause of death, C, the date of death, and D, whether the death was brought about by any act or omission prima facie involving or amounting to an offense on the part of any person. In case of a reopened inquest, in terms of Section 17A, subsection 3 thereof provides as follows, I quote, a judge holding an inquest that has been reopened in terms of this section shall record any finding that differs from a finding referred to in Section 16, as well as the respect in which it differs, close quote. The finding by the magistrate in this instance is a finding that's referred to in Section 16.2. At the end of the 1972 inquest, the magistrate made the following findings in terms of Section 16 of the Act. I quote, A, the identity of the deceased is Ahmed Timol, an Asian male, 26 years old, born South African, teacher by profession. B, the date of death, 27 October 1971. C, cause or probable cause of death, the deceased died because of serious brain damage and loss of blood sustained when he jumped out of a window of room 1026 at John Foster Square and fell to the ground on the southern side of the building. He committed suicide. D, no living person is responsible for his death. In regard to item A in the paragraph above, this court is of the view that even in death, Timol deserves the dignity of the restoration of his citizenship, like all South Africans. He entered the struggle and gave his life for that. This court will not identify him as, I quote, an Asian male, close quote, but differently as a South African citizen. In item B, in the findings of the magistrate, the date of death is stated as 27 October 1971. This remains unchanged. In item C, cause or probable cause of death, the finding by the magistrate on the cause of death follows the evidence of Skeepers who buckled under cross-examination. Initially, when he testified, he opined, as it appears in the autopsy report, that the cause of death was multiple injuries. Under cross-examination, he stated that the cause of death is serious brain damage and loss of blood, which the magistrate accepted. This court will follow the opinion of Dr. Naidu that the death was caused by massive head, that is brain and chest, vital center damage, and compromised respiration injuries. Further, and for reasons already stated in this judgment, this court will record a different finding to that of the magistrate when he found that Timol jumped out of the window of room 1026 at John Foster Square, fell to the ground on the southern side of the building, and that he committed suicide. This court came to a different conclusion, that Timol did not jump out of the window of room 1026, but was either pushed out of the window of room 1026 or from the roof of the John Foster Square building. Thus, he did not commit suicide, but was murdered. This court will also record a different finding to that of the magistrate in regard to item D of his findings. He found that no living person is responsible for Timol's death. It is ironic that 46 years after the death of Timol, the magistrate's finding is partly correct, as most of the main perpetrators this court would have recommended for investigation and possible charges have since passed on. The finding by this court is that all members of the security branch involved with the interrogation of Timol or keeping guard over him in room 1026 are collectively responsible for the injuries sustained before he fell. They were supposed to keep him in the police cell, as the warrant for his detention stated. They did not do so, but kept him in room 1026 to conceal the torture. In the first instance, Timol was in their custody, and they had a duty of care over him, which they failed to exercise. Secondly, the security branch denied knowledge of the ante-mortem injuries on his body, which denials this court found were a cover-up. The security branch involved in the interrogation of Timol inflicted the injuries through systematic and continuous torture. They intentionally and lawfully applied brutal methods of torture on Timol. This court's prima facie finding is that members of the security branch were interrogating Timol on the day he died, through an act of commission or omission, murdered Timol. This they committed through dolus eventualis as the form of intent. Rodriguez placed himself on the scene as a party to the cover-up to conceal the truth. He thereby, prima facie, by his conduct, became an accessory after the fact of murder. An accessory after the fact is a person who renders assistance to someone else, that is the perpetrator, who has committed an offense. Corbett J.A. in State versus Morgan opines that the association of the accessory with a crime should take the form of the accessory helping the perpetrator evade justice. This is precisely what Rodriguez, on his own version, did. Else should be investigated for misleading the court that he only knows of the allegations of assault on detainees from the media. The police file records reflect that he was in attendance as one of the interrogators when Naik was subjected to the helicopter method of torture, after which he lost the use of his hands. Sons should also be investigated for testifying under oath that he heard of detainees' assault from the media. There are 5 witnesses who filed affidavits immediately after he testified, indicating that he was misleading this court. And in the affidavit, they state the instances in which Sons brutally assaulted them in detention. Rodriguez should be investigated for making contradictory statements whilst under oath. He has a previous conviction of perjury. Now come to the findings. In terms of Section 17A(3)(b, read with 16(2) of the Act, the court finds as follows. A, the deceased is Ahmed Timol, a South African citizen aged 29 at the time of his death. B, the cause of death is massive head, brain and chest vital center damage and compromised respiratory injuries. C, the date of death remains unchanged, 27 October 1971. D, Timol's death was brought about by an act of having been pushed from the 10th floor or roof of the John Foster Square building to fall to the ground, such act having been committed through dolus eventualis as the form of intent and prima facie amounting to murder. There's a prima facie evidence implicating Gloy and Van Niekerk, who were on duty and interrogating Timol at the time he was pushed to fall to his death. Rodriguez, on his own version, participated in the cover-up to conceal the crime of murder as an accessory after the fact, and went on to commit perjury by presenting contradictory evidence before the 1972 and the 2017 inquest. He should accordingly be investigated with a view to his prosecution. In terms of Section 17A(3)(c of the Act, the record of proceedings is hereby submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Recommendations. The 2017 reopened inquest, the first of its kind in South Africa, has revealed a number of lessons to be learned. Of importance is that all branches of the state have to ensure that the boundaries set by the Constitution for the respect of human rights and dignity should never be crossed. It should be the task of all branches of the state to begin to develop a culture of intolerance to any form of human rights violations. One of the drawbacks with this reopened inquest is the fact that the reopening came late in the day when most of the members of the security branch involved in the interrogation of Timol and the investigation thereof had passed on. In addition, the court had to do with the mysterious disappearance of the 1972 inquest record that dealt with the evidence of the police officials in court, and in particular page 3 of the affidavit of Rodriguez, which, according to the magistrate's judgment, explained how Timol fell. Consequently, the key witnesses who would have been called to testify in regard to the events preceding the fall were not available. It is therefore important for the future that the state ensures that records of inquest are preserved, considering the fact that the Act provides for reopening without any limitation as to time. The inquest also revealed that there are many more families who are seeking closure on the unanswered questions concerning the death of their relatives in detention. They, like all families whose relatives died in detention, need healing. They need closure. It is thus the view of this court that the families whose relatives died in detention, particularly those where the inquest returned a finding of death by suicide, should be assisted at their initiative to obtain the records and gather further information with a view to have initial inquest reopened. The Human Rights Commission, working in consultation with law enforcement agencies, should be sufficiently resourced to take on this task. It will be remiss of this court not to address an issue on which Bizos evidence put a spotlight. This is the impropriety role played by some of the magistracy, prosecuting authorities, and medical experts in the past inquest proceedings. Bizos evidence reveals the role of some of these public officials in being complicit in exonerating members of the security branch from the crimes they committed. The 1972 inquest into the death of Timol is one such example. From the outset, it had to take a court order to allow Timol's family and their lawyers access to case documents before the inquest commenced. The evidence of the 1972 inquest further demonstrates how the prosecution made no effort to obtain evidence other than that of the police, and the magistrate attempting to explain away the pre-fall injuries without any shred of evidence supporting his statement concerning the brawl. Bizos also makes reference in his publication to the inquest into the death of Steve Bantu Biko. The much publicized and documented unprofessional conduct of the doctors who testified in that inquest illustrates the point. Doctors, like lawyers, take an oath. In their profession, it is a Hippocratic oath. Every professional lawyer and public official survives on integrity. Magistrates and prosecutors are lawyers participating in administration of justice and are expected to discharge their functions in terms of the oath they were sworn to uphold. For all public office bearers of the state, an oath is sacrosanct. Apart from their knowledge of and experience in the practice of law, lawyers, in particular judicial officers, are expected to bring to bear their honesty, independence, personal and professional integrity, and ability to act without fear or favor in the administration of justice. It is not ethical and proper on the part of a judicial officer to preside over or decide cases either out of fear or in favor of a person, entity, or institution, or in expectation of promotion or reward, or in advancement of some real or perceived interest. Judicial officers have to be loyal only to the Constitution and the cause of justice. Public officials in the administration of justice are also enjoined by the law to jealously guard against casting aspersions on the integrity of the judicial system by conducting themselves in a manner contrary to the oath of office. Such conduct has no place in a constitutional democracy. I hand down the judgment. It is okay.
Standing ovation therefore from the judge, of course, found that Timol was pushed. A number of lessons the judge indicate that we could learn from the Timol case. You've heard there that officials must be loyal to the Constitution, and you also heard the implicitness of the security branch and others in the case of Timol that they say were pushed. Well, right now we continue with our coverage of the Life Esidimeni arbitration. Let's go there live.
The case, so I'm just referring to that this other aspect I was not aware of, which must be investigated as well, which was a concern that we're raising.
So, okay, so I understand you now. When you say you were concerned about the relationship between Manamela, Mrs. Manamela, and the signing of the contracts, you mean to appoint, the appointment process of the members of the Mental Health Review Board, rather than, I misunderstood you to mean in these kind of arrangements and this kind of an agreement where there's an agreement between Mrs. Manamela, or I think the proper title is actually Dr. Manamela, and Mrs. Masondo. So that is what I was referring to. But you are saying you are not aware of this.
No, this response I never was aware of. That's why I'm seeing the response for the first time. But I would refer this to Dr. Kinosi. Perhaps there could be other investigations, but I would refer that to raise it with Dr. Kinosi.
But the first letter from Section 27 was copied to you.
Yes, I'm aware of the letter.
So are you aware then of that particular part of the letter?
Yes, I'm aware of that, but I'm not aware of the response, that in the response that matter was not raised.
And you say that Mr. Kanoshi is the right person for us to take the question to?
Yes, but I was raising a matter that I'm aware of, that over and above being appointed as members of the Mental Health Review Board, there was an anomaly with regard to the separate contract that Ms. Manamela entered into. It's irregular. I was just raising that aspect.
I understand. We'll take it up further with the appropriate person. So my final set of questions then is in relation to the issue of burials, unlawful burials, bodies who have not been bodies that have not been identified, and so on. You, DG, provided this process with a document which describes the intervention by the department in relation to the issue of tracing the deceased. The document is to be found at page 3733 of the record. I have a copy, if it's easier.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Council. I know are you getting to a new point?
I am getting to a new topic, yes.
Are we done with Ms. Masondo?
Oh, I'm certainly not done with Ms. Masondo, but I think that there's a more appropriate witness to answer those questions. So I'm done for now, yes, on that topic.
Oh, very well.
May I proceed with the next line of questions? Page 3733, have you located it?
373?
3733. I do have a copy, if it would be easier for me to hand it to you. Do you? Do you see it?
Yes. Yes.
It's entitled Report on Tracing of the Deceased from Esidimeni. It's compiled by the National Department of Health.
Okay.
Do you have it, Judge Masineki? I can...
I've just been, yes, I have it. Yeah. 3733.
That's correct.
I have the big and the small one, so I'm well equipped, I think.
Who authored this report?
It's Ms. Pakiso Nechitsivani.
And on whose instruction did she author this report?
On my instruction, following the work that I had initiated to visit the mortuaries to trace bodies and locate them.
So the report was preceded by an investigation?
Yes.
And who participated in the investigation?
The first was myself, the Ms. Nechitsivani, Dr. Mudisani from the province. On the first day, the MEC and Dr. Kinosi joined us when we went to the facility. And may I just say that it was triggered by a testimony that was given by a family member. During the family event,
Are you okay, DG, or do you want us to take a short adjournment? In any event, it is time for tea. It may be that you want to hold your breath. Council, do you want to finish your question, or could I rather...
There are a few questions regarding this report. It would be appropriate for us to adjourn.
No, I just meant this question. I realize you probably have more, after which, if you are able to answer now, then we'll take the tea break.
yes, to say that it was triggered by the first testimony that was given by a family member.
Is testimony by a family member?
Yes.
About what? About 5 patients who were buried?
Yes, to say firstly, when she asked for where her relative was, she was told that the relative was in a facility in Salisville. She originally comes from Atteridgeville, and she said she knew Salisville and Atteridgeville very well. And as far as she recalled, the facility that was referred to was a butchery. And it is on those bases that I decided to do the investigation myself, to go and look at this facility.
Shall we stay quiet, please? Yes, would you like to complete the answer, and then we would take the adjournment, did you?
Yes, and I requested Ms. Pakiso Nechitsivani, because it was on a Saturday, that whatever she was doing, she stopped and go find this facility. I even requested the DG in the province to ensure that she had police escorts. And I left the family event to go find the facility myself. In fact, Ms. Esidimeni said she struggled to find the facility. And when I went there, it was just a building. It did not have a name or anything. It was completely sealed. And when we got there, we tried to locate who owned the facility and so on. There was just no information until we were helped by one of the constables who tried to make contact to get the owners. In fact, next door to that facility is a bottle store. And we eventually located the owner. But she refused to come and said to us she doesn't have transport. We then said perhaps the police must go and collect her if she couldn't come to the facility. We were later joined by the MEC and Dr. Kinosi. But we told her again that we'll send the police to fetch her, and she subsequently agreed that she would come. When she arrived at this place, she said she did not have keys. So it means we could not access the facility. And we asked her that the police would accompany her to go find the keys. And indeed, the police accompanied her, drove around, came back after an hour, empty-handed. There were no keys. And we asked DG Baleni to ask the commissioners that that place ought to be sealed, nobody leaves, nobody enters, until it could be accessed by us, because we are not clear why she was not helpful. So the outcome was that we left around 11 at night, came back the following day. In fact, in the morning when we were on our way back, she had already arrived to say that they had a burial that morning and that she wanted access to her facility. So the following day, the keys were available. The facility could be opened.
What time was that the next day?
It was
what time in the morning?
8 o'clock in the morning.
8 o'clock in the morning?
Yes. And when we asked her about...
What was the name of the owner? Do you recall?
Sure. I have to recall who the owner was. Can I refer to the records? I'll come back with the owner. In the morning, when we asked her as to whether did she have any life Esidimeni, former life Esidimeni mental health patients who were deceased, she said she doesn't, her services are not for South Africans. She only deals with foreigners. And
but did the facility turn out to be a mortuary? Once it was opened, was it a mortuary?
Yes, it was.
And there were deceased bodies in there?
There were deceased bodies, yes. 9 of them. But they were not life Esidimeni. She explained to us that the person, in fact, whilst we were there, we were confronted by a lawyer who said we were not to do anything because he had to, we were supposed to have a warrant, a search warrant for the client. But we had just gone there to get information, not to search. So what we did, we then asked DG Baleni to secure a warrant for us. But he was not, he was the lawyer for another undertaker called Put You to Rest. But it turned out that Put You to Rest was the one that was getting the bodies and asking different mortuaries to keep the bodies for them. So I then asked the team to go to put you to rest to get all the records so that they could go through each record and check against our list and try and identify any of the life Esidimeni deceased people.
Thank you. Justice Masi.
Yes, Counsel.
This is quite an important issue, and we intend to probe it a bit further. And I'd prefer not to do it hastily if this would be inappropriate.
Let's take the tea break now. We will resume just shortly after 12. I think let's say we're going to resume at 12 midday. We now adjourn.
Life Esidimeni arbitration, shocking revelations. You heard there. There was a mortuary called Put You to Rest. We will continue after the tea break. Right now, let's take a short break.
With the stories of abuse from the other 8, but they haven't been ready to pursue any angles. They've offered their support. They've offered the comfort to the 8, and it's been an amazing journey.
It feels like your heart actually literally sunk in your shoes.
It wasn't a long encounter. I think at the time I froze.
The way the criminal justice system deals with sexual violence is problematic. And I don't know, unless there's a fundamental change in many things, the way prosecutors deal with the victim in the matter.
For all investigative insights, stay tuned to Special Assignment every Saturday at 17:30.
Welcome back. My name is Kendall Makhamate, and we've had a very interesting day all day today. And you know what? We've been quite busy trying to get the bulletin ready for you to make sure that we can bring you the most up-to-date versions of what's going on around the world. First up, we talk about the MTN8 final, which is literally just days away. Now, with Durban having experienced some of the worst flooding it has had in recent times, the big questions really have been about the readiness of the city of Durban, as well as the Moses Mabhida Stadium, to host the MTN8 final, which is happening this coming Saturday. Let's have a look-see. I had a chat with Vusimo Zibuko, and he had quite a lot to say about the readiness of the stadium. Now, as soon as we can, we'll bring that story to you because it's quite key what he had to say. Now, South African Rugby has confirmed that it's going to be getting rid of the services of their Johan van Graan, their forwards coach, who's going to be moving to Munster, and almost like a swap deal with Rassie Erasmus, as Rassie Erasmus has signed a deal to come back to South Africa to become the technical director for SARU. Now, Van Graan spent the last 6 seasons as a Springbok forwards coach, working with first Heineke Meyer and then with Alistair Coetzee. He'll be taking on the same responsibilities as the director of rugby at Munster, and Rassie Erasmus, who returns to South Africa in December to take up that role of director of rugby at SARU. Van Graan was first appointed in the role before the start of the 2012 season by former Springbok coach Heineke Meyer, with whom he's enjoyed a close working relationship at provincial and national level. The 37-year-old Van Graan also worked with Meyer at the Bulls, where he was part of the team that won the Vodacom Super Rugby title on 3 occasions. Now, Baroka FC goalkeeper Oscarine Masuluke has thanked fans for voting for his wonder goal, which made the final shortlist for FIFA's Puskás Award. And he asked them to continue voting until the 23rd of October. Masuluke's last-minute bicycle kick goal against Orlando Pirates last season made him the first African player and goalkeeper in the world to make the shortlist for this prestigious award.
Unlike the other two goals in the running for the Puskás Award, which were scored by strikers, this one was by a goalkeeper and with the last kick of the match to level the score. While those make it special and deserving of the award is the number of votes that will ultimately determine the one that wins when FIFA announces the winner on the 23rd of this month in London. The towering shot-stopper says he took his chance after they were awarded a corner against Pirates because he told his teammates he was going to score a day before.
As I went to the camp, I told my teammate that tomorrow I'm